In this episode, we begin with a very practical shift in mindset that helps brand new learners make more sense of cyber threats without feeling lost in a blur of tools, alerts, and attack names. Many people first study cybersecurity by focusing on individual incidents or flashy examples, but defenders become much stronger when they learn to organize adversary behavior into patterns they can recognize and think through repeatedly. That is where threat frameworks become useful, because they give structure to activity that might otherwise feel scattered and unpredictable. A framework does not remove uncertainty, and it does not magically explain every event. What it does is give you a dependable way to sort behavior into meaningful categories so you can ask better questions, notice stronger patterns, and make calmer decisions. Just as important, repeatable thinking keeps you from reinventing your reasoning every time something suspicious appears in front of you. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at CyberAuthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Adversary behavior is simply the set of actions an attacker takes to reach a goal inside or around a system, network, application, or organization. Those actions are not always dramatic, and they are rarely as random as they first appear to a beginner. Even when attackers improvise, they are usually still trying to solve familiar problems such as how to get access, how to stay there, how to move towards something valuable, and how to avoid being noticed for as long as possible. When you start looking at cyber activity through that lens, you stop seeing each event as an isolated surprise and start seeing it as part of a larger behavior pattern. That is important because defenders do not just need to know that something happened. They need to understand what kind of step it may represent in a broader sequence of actions. Once behavior becomes the focus, security work starts to feel less like guessing and more like interpreting a meaningful trail. A threat framework is best understood as an organized model for describing how adversaries tend to behave. It is not a prediction machine, and it is not a list of guaranteed steps that every attacker follows in the same order. Instead, it acts like a map or filing system that helps defenders place observations into useful categories. Some frameworks describe broad phases of an attack, while others break behavior into goals and common methods used to achieve those goals. For a beginner, the value is not in memorizing a large reference set. The value is in realizing that frameworks give you a shared structure for thinking, discussing, and learning. Without some kind of structure, one suspicious login, one permissions change, and one odd data transfer can feel like three unrelated mysteries. With a framework, those same clues may start to look like connected pieces of one adversary story. Repeatable thinking is the habit of approaching suspicious behavior with the same core questions each time instead of reacting in a different way depending on stress, surprise, or personal instinct. This matters because cybersecurity environments produce a constant stream of events, and human attention can become inconsistent very quickly when people are tired or overloaded. A repeatable thought process gives you stability. It encourages you to ask what happened, what goal this behavior may support, what may have happened before it, what may happen next, and why the observed activity matters in this specific environment. That discipline reduces panic and reduces guesswork at the same time. Rather than jumping from one technical detail to another, you begin to move through suspicious activity with a more deliberate rhythm. That does not make you slow. In many cases, it actually makes you faster because organized thinking helps you notice the important patterns sooner and avoid wasting time on disconnected details that do not change the overall picture. One of the simplest ways frameworks organize adversary behavior is by the purpose behind a step rather than by the exact tool used during that step. An adversary may first try to gain entry, then try to establish a foothold, then try to increase access, then move toward additional systems, then collect valuable information, and eventually remove that information or cause some other form of impact. Those broad purposes are easier to reason about than a long list of specific attack names. A beginner does not need to know every possible method to understand that these stages reflect common attacker needs. Someone trying to steal information still needs some path inward, some way to maintain access, and some method of reaching the target. By organizing behavior around those kinds of goals, defenders can build a clearer mental picture of how different suspicious events may relate to one another. That clarity helps turn raw technical noise into a story about movement, intent, and risk. A very useful distinction inside many threat frameworks is the difference between a goal and a method. A goal answers what the adversary is trying to achieve at a particular moment, while a method answers how that goal is being pursued. That may sound simple, but it is one of the most valuable beginner insights in all of security operations. If you focus only on the method, you can become too attached to surface details such as one script, one tool, or one malware family. Those details matter, but they change often. The underlying goal is usually more stable. An attacker still wants access, persistence, discovery, movement, collection, or disruption even when the exact method changes from one case to another. Thinking this way makes defenders more resilient because they learn to look past cosmetic differences. Instead of saying this attack is new so our old thinking no longer applies, they begin to say this behavior serves a familiar goal, so we can still reason about what it means and what other actions may follow. This is one reason frameworks are so helpful in real security work. Attackers regularly change file names, delivery methods, online locations, and technical tricks in order to avoid easy detection. If defenders organize their thinking only around those changing details, they spend a lot of time reacting to surface variation without seeing the deeper pattern. A threat framework helps you anchor your thinking in behavior that tends to repeat across many different incidents. A malicious attachment, a stolen password, and a misused remote access pathway may all look different on the surface, but each one may serve the same basic purpose of helping an adversary get initial access. Once you recognize that shared behavior, your thinking becomes more stable. You are less likely to be distracted by novelty and more likely to focus on what the adversary is trying to accomplish. That gives defenders a better chance to detect related behavior, anticipate next steps, and strengthen controls against whole categories of action rather than against one narrow example. At the same time, good framework use requires flexibility, because real adversaries do not move through life like actors following a perfectly ordered script. Some attackers skip steps because they begin with unusually strong access. Some repeat steps because their first attempt failed or because they are expanding their options. Some operate slowly and quietly, while others move quickly once they find something valuable. This means a framework should guide thought, not imprison it. A beginner can easily make the mistake of assuming that every event must fit neatly into a clean timeline, but security is usually messier than that. The better approach is to treat the framework as a way of asking where a behavior seems to belong and what other nearby behaviors might be relevant, while still remaining open to exceptions. When you use frameworks with that mindset, they help you stay organized without becoming rigid, and that balance is exactly what repeatable thinking needs in order to remain practical. Frameworks are especially valuable in monitoring and triage because they help defenders decide what observed activity may mean in a larger sequence. A suspicious login on its own may feel uncertain, but if it is followed by access to a privileged system, an unexpected permissions change, and unusual movement toward a sensitive repository, the behavior begins to map into a more coherent pattern. That pattern suggests more than isolated curiosity. It suggests progression. A framework helps an analyst ask whether the activity points to access, elevation, movement, collection, or preparation for impact. Those questions can make triage much stronger because they move the conversation beyond whether an alert merely looks strange. Instead, the analyst asks what role the event may play in an adversary's path. This improves prioritization, because a small event that fits a meaningful stage in a dangerous chain may deserve more attention than a louder event that has little connection to sensitive systems, valuable data, or broader adversary progress. Threat frameworks also support investigations by helping analysts reconstruct what likely happened before and after the activity they can already see. Investigations often begin in the middle of a story rather than at the beginning. An analyst may discover suspicious data access or a strange process, and then have to reason backward to ask how the adversary got there and forward to ask what objectives may have followed. A framework gives shape to that reasoning. If you observe signs of internal movement, it becomes natural to ask what earlier access may have enabled that movement. If you observe selective collection of valuable data, it becomes natural to ask what persistence or privilege changes made that collection possible. This kind of structured thinking does not replace evidence, but it helps analysts search for the next most meaningful evidence. It turns investigation from random wandering into guided exploration, which is far more useful when time is limited and the environment is full of competing signals. Another important benefit of frameworks is that they improve communication across different security and business roles. Security analysts, engineers, incident responders, managers, and even non-technical leaders often struggle when the same event is described only through raw technical detail. A threat framework provides a more understandable language for discussing what an adversary was trying to achieve and where defensive attention may be needed. Instead of explaining only that a certain alert fired on a certain host, a defender can explain that the observed behavior appears consistent with unauthorized access followed by internal movement towards sensitive assets. That framing is easier for others to follow because it focuses on intention and risk rather than on isolated mechanics. It also supports stronger teamwork, since different groups can align around the same model of what is happening. When people share a framework, they argue less about labels and spend more time deciding what action makes the most sense in response to the adversary behavior being observed. Frameworks become even more powerful after an incident because they help organizations learn in a structured way instead of settling for vague lessons. If a team knows that an adversary gained access, stayed active, moved internally, and reached sensitive data, then post-incident review can ask where controls were strong, where visibility was weak, and which stages were hardest to detect or disrupt. That matters because learning should not stop at saying the organization experienced an attack. A useful review asks how the attack unfolded and where defensive improvement would have broken the chain earlier or reduced its success. This is another form of repeatable thinking. The same structured categories that help during monitoring and investigation can also help during improvement. Over time, that creates a much more mature security posture, because the organization is no longer just reacting to incidents one by one. It is studying adversary behavior in a consistent way and using that understanding to strengthen prevention, detection, and response together. There are, however, a few common mistakes that beginners should avoid. One mistake is treating a framework like proof. Just because observed activity resembles a known behavior pattern does not mean you fully understand who the adversary is or what every next move will be. Another mistake is believing the framework itself does the thinking for you. It does not. It only supports thinking by giving you a structure. A third mistake is becoming so focused on fitting events into neat categories that you ignore unique business context, unusual attacker creativity, or internal explanations that may also fit the evidence. Good defenders use frameworks to become more organized, not more narrow-minded. They combine structured models with real-world evidence, operational knowledge, and healthy skepticism. That combination is what keeps repeatable thinking from becoming mechanical and keeps threat frameworks from turning into rigid templates that hide more than they reveal. As we close, the most important lesson is that threat frameworks help you organize adversary behavior so that suspicious activity becomes easier to interpret and discuss. They give you a practical model for understanding goals, methods, progression, and likely next steps without forcing you to memorize every technical detail of every attack. Repeatable thinking then turns that model into a habit, helping you approach each new case with a calm, consistent set of questions instead of reacting from confusion or instinct alone. For a brand new learner, this is a major step forward because it transforms cybersecurity from a loose collection of surprises into something much more understandable. You begin to see that adversaries often solve familiar problems in recognizable ways, even when their tools and timing change. Once you can organize that behavior with a framework and reason through it repeatedly, you are much better prepared to detect, investigate, explain, and respond with confidence.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.